Welcome to Traveling Down Biblical Archaeology for the 21st Century. Hi, I'm Gary Byers, Dr. Stephen Collins, and we're here to talk about the Bible and archaeology, and really to no one's surprise, we're going to discuss the city of Sodom in the Bible. Pretty important subject.
We seem to get around to that often.
We really do. We really do. Well, we got our computers up here. We're really ready, set for some serious business. And we wanted to particularly talk about one passage that I had never really thought much about in the scheme of Sodom narratives until you brought this up.
Well, I had it brought up to me a lot as to where Sodom is relative to Jerusalem. Is it north or is it south? And that comes from the passage that you brought up on your computer.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about this today because it is an important subject. If you're interested in this topic, you either have already contemplated this verse, or after we do it today, you're surely going to think about it. And it's an important verse for the whole concept. In fact, my favorite part is not actually what we're going to talk about, but somehow I'll sneak that part into the very end because I think that is a powerful message to us. But anyway, I'm in the book of Ezekiel, and my first thought when Dr. C brought it up a number of years ago was, what does Ezekiel have to do with Sodom? And so here it is. Ezekiel tells us why. So here's the start of a quote. I'm in Ezekiel 16, and we'll start in verse 44. Everyone who quotes Proverbs will quote this proverb about you. And he's talking to the unfaithful in Jerusalem in Ezekiel's day. Ezekiel's in Babylon, but this is a message to the Jewish people still back in the land. Didn't go to captivity. Everyone who quotes Proverbs will quote this one about you. Like mother, like daughter. You are a true daughter of your mother who despised her husband and her children, and you are a true sister of your sisters who despised their husbands and their children. Then he says, your mother was a Hittite and your father an Amorite. Now that would be worth discussing, but we're not going to talk about that. We only got so much time today, but we can do that sometime. Then verse 46, your older sister was Samaria, who lived to the north of you with her daughters. And we happen to know that's true on our Bible maps. And your younger sister, who lived to the south of you and her daughters, was Sodom. Ooh. So he's relating Jerusalem to two bad girls of the Old Testament, Samaria, who really screwed up bad, and Sodom, who really screwed up bad, and Jerusalem is just like her mother and just like her sisters. So let's talk about those two sisters in particular. Your older sister, Samaria, who lived to the north, and your younger sister, Sodom, who lived to the south. It's all yours.
Of course, those who believe in a southern Dead Sea location for the city of Sodom,
yes,
latch on to this verse of these verses.
Yeah, yes.
And of course, why wouldn't they?
Mm-hmm. That's what it says in my English Bible.
But I'm going to talk about why shouldn't they? Now, we have to understand, and one of the first things that you ever learn in studying biblical hermeneutics, biblical interpretation, is that poetic passages, like this passage in Ezekiel, are not typically good for historical understanding or even geographical understanding. They are, in fact, poetic. They're metaphorical. They're using a lot of simile, a lot of symbolism. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes you have to take what it says not in terms of historical specifics or geographical specifics, but in terms of the overall message.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's happening here. We have to understand this. Because let me just talk about let's take a strict geographical look at this passage. Now, look at where Jerusalem, look at your Bible map and look at where Jerusalem is located. It is just about, not quite to the north end of the Dead Sea.
Yep.
Okay. So, in some maps, it's exactly right at the north end of the Dead Sea, but it's actually a little bit south of the north end of the Dead Sea. Now, from that location, certainly Samaria would be to the north. But if you look at the location of, say, the traditional site for Sodom, Babadra, and you drew a line from Jerusalem over to Babadra, it would be more eastward than southward, because it's about halfway up the Dead Sea. So on this, I'm not going to make an argument out of that.
Right.
But what I'm going to make an argument about is the use of the word north or south at all. I think the passage doesn't say north or south. I think it says something else. Now let's talk about the fact that the Hebrew language has no dedicated words for the 4 cardinal directions. There is no dedicated word for north, south, east, or west. So what are the words for the cardinal directions? Well, you face the rising sun. That's your starting orientation. You face the rising sun, and the word in front of or before or forward is the word for east.
Yeah. Yes, that's true.
Okay, so in front of or forward, east. Then that would make backside or behind west. So you could say I went forward, it would mean I'm going east. Or I went back to my backside, the opposite direction, I'm going west. Well, if that's east and west, then the word for north is the word left hand. So left hand can mean north or can mean at the left hand. Or the other one, right hand, would be south or just right hand. So there's no specific word for the cardinal directions, and the words that are used often to translate the cardinal directions can be used to translate other meanings within that. They have a broader overall meaning.
So the context is going to be important.
Now let's go back to the
Which way it means.
time of Abraham and Lot. Back to the time of the story of Sodom, where Lot had come to Abraham and he said, our men are fighting, we've got too many people and too many animals for the country that we occupy. Let's separate.
Well, this is Genesis 13.
Genesis 13. Abraham says, good idea. And he says to Lot then, so you go to the left, and it's always translated. I've never seen a translation where it was translated, you go to the north, I'll go to the south, you go to the south, I'll go to the north.
Yeah.
And it's the same words as in Ezekiel. So, Lot, you go to the left, I'll go to the right. You go to the right, I'll go to the left. In other words, pick a direction. North, southwest, southeast, northwest. Could be any direction you want to go. You go that direction, I'll go the opposite direction. So this is structured as an idiomatic phrase just to say, I'll go the opposite direction as you. Pick a direction, I'll go opposite. That's all it's saying. Right hand as opposed to left hand. Now let's go to Ezekiel, where it says that your older sister Samaria to your left hand, which could be translated north, as it is in this passage. But it doesn't need to be translated north any more than that same phrase, same word in Genesis 13 needs to be translated north, which it's not. It's always translated left.
But it's the same word in Hebrew.
Same word. So let's go to the one that says south. He says, then your sister Sodom to the south which still on any map is more east than it is south, is your younger sister. And so what is he saying? I think he's saying not north and south, but left hand and right hand. In other words, Jerusalem, God's saying, you, Jerusalem, are just as bad as Samaria and Sodom. And you have two partners in crime, one to your left hand, one to your right hand. They're together with you. You've got a sister on your left and a sister on your right, and you in the middle. It's not talking about directions. It's talking about the close relationship in evil, I guess, between the two. Now, there's something else in this passage that if people insist on pushing this Samaria north, Sodom south from Jerusalem, then there's something else in the passage you should pay attention to. Mm-hmm. There's a younger sister and an older sister. Now, here's where you need to know that not only the text and the stories in the text, biblical text, but you need to know the archaeology as well. When was Sodom founded? Sodom goes back all the way to Genesis chapter 10, which is the rise of the first great walled cities, fortified cities in the Near East. This puts us at least back in the early Bronze period. We're certain of that. So it takes us back to the early Bronze period. And so when was Samaria founded?
A long time after that.
About the end of the ninth century, or into the 10th century, beginning of the 9th century BC. In other words, around 900 BC. By who?
Omri, king of Israel.
The first, the most important, I think, of all the kings of Israel after they split off. Remember how Jeroboam and Rehoboam split, and the northern kingdom took the larger number of tribes, and Judah in the south, basically became the southern kingdom, and which was the throne of David. And then eventually, both were done in Samaria, Israel in the north first by the Assyrians, and then in the south, Judah by the Babylonians, which brings us to the period of Ezekiel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But so these two kingdoms, Sodom and Samaria, archaeologically and even in the Bible, would not be younger or older. They'd be flipped.
Yeah.
Because Sodom is several thousand years older than Samaria. By the way, I don't care which Sodom you apply it to. Whether you apply it to the traditional Sodom or the Tal al-Hammam, the real Sodom, we would say, doesn't matter because we're talking about the early Bronze Age. And so I always say it like this. Sodom is no more south of Jerusalem than it is the younger sister to Jerusalem. Samaria would be the younger sister. And so by saying younger sister, older sister, what in the world are they talking about? This is symbolic, metaphorical language. It's just talking about a younger and an older sister.
On one side or the other.
Yeah, unless your mom had triplets and you're all the same age. It's a family of 3 girls, and one of them's in the middle, which is Jerusalem, and the other ones are just there, and the writer wasn't thinking about it. It wasn't important. Oh, which was founded first, Samaria or Sodom? Which one should be the younger sister? Which one should be the older sister? It wasn't even in his thought. He just said, in a family of 3 sisters, one of them's in the middle, and one of them's older, and one of them's younger, but they all belong together. Unless her mom had triplets, which isn't likely.
And that's exactly what Ezekiel's saying. They all belong together in the same category.
In the same category. So, Sodom is no more in the south than it is the younger sister. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about word pictures, symbols, metaphors, similes, these kinds of things. And so in this poetic passage, what is God saying? He's saying that Jerusalem has a problem, and it's similar to that which was Sodom, which God destroyed, and it's similar to Samaria, which God destroyed. And it said, you better get your act straight, because I take care of you too. And I basically already have. We're in the time of the Babylonian captivity, and you need to get your act together.
In fact, verse 47, so that's the next verse, says, you not only followed their ways and copied their detestable practices, but in all your ways you soon became more depraved than they. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, your sister Sodom and her daughters never did what you and your daughters have done. What an indictment against Jerusalem from the Almighty.
Exactly.
Now, this is the New American Standard Translation. If everybody cares to, check it and look at another translation, but that's what we're talking about. And then, Dr. C, the last part, which you really pointed out as you were dealing with this passage, first time I heard you talk about it, and then you said, now you need to see something else. And God just said that you have been more detestable than your sisters. But then in verse 49, he says, now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy.
This, from God's mouth to Ezekiel's ear, that's our ear,
to our ears,
is telling us the reason why he destroyed Sodom. And there is none of the expected language in this from what most people know about the city of Sodom. These people, I'm certain, it's obvious from the Genesis text, from all of that Sodom had some problems. They had some sexual sin, they had some sexual practices that were even, some of the Canaanites were even crying out against, I think. But overall, their big sins were here. Now it says they did detestable things.
Yeah.
But the main things were you're arrogant, overfed, wealthy, and you're not taking care of the poor and needy. And I always thought, that sounds like an indictment against some countries I know in the modern era. So let's be careful to have, if we're going to talk about Sodom and talk about why God destroyed Sodom, let's have the same heart and the same attitude toward it that God has. And not invent one ourselves. His attitude was that they were wealthy, and of course our excavation of Sodom has shown that it was a big city. It was a wealthy city. It was a strong and influential city. In fact, for about 400 or 500 years, it was the only city in the whole southern Levant from about 2500 down till about, 1900 BC. And so it was a pretty important place. But it had a much bigger idea about itself than the reality was. And they were so engaged with their wealth, and I think their sense of invulnerability.
Yeah.
We never found any evidence that they were conquered militarily.
That's right. Well, Samaria in the north, Sodom in the south were not good cities, and God dealt with them. And he said to Jerusalem, you're as bad, you're worse than they were. So, wrestle with that, all of that, and appreciate God's word, even down to Ezekiel talking about Sodom. Join us again, troweling down biblical archaeology for the 21st century.